Two boys, both born in Mississippi, both black, both poor, both headed to the same city, the same South Side, the same streets, on a collision course that would divide Chicago for the next half century. Jeff Fort, born February 20th, 1947, in Aberdeen, Mississippi. Larry Hoover, born November 30th, 1950, in Jackson, Mississippi. Fort's family lands in the Woodlawn neighborhood in 1955. Hoover's family rolls into Englewood when the boy is barely 4 years old. Neither family had much. Neither neighborhood had much either. What those streets did have was war. All right, y'all. Now let me keep it real with you for a second. I spent like 3 straight hours digging into Jeff Fort's early years, and what I found, man, it honestly surprised me. Because the story everybody thinks they know, the gangster, the terrorist, dude locked up in Supermax for life, that story don't start where you'd expect. It starts with a kid who was so good at calming people down, settling arguments, bringing folks together, that people around him had a nickname for him. They called him Angel. Angel Jeff Fort, the same man who would later negotiate a terrorism deal with Muammar Gaddafi. They called him Angel. By the time he's 18 years old, Fort has done something almost nobody in Chicago gang history had ever managed. He took 21 separate street gangs, 21 crews who hated each other, and folded them into a single federation. He called the governing body the Main 21, 5,000 members answering to one structure on the south side of Chicago in the 1960s. That is not a street gang, that is an organization. Meanwhile, in Englewood, Larry Hoover is 13 years old when his gang's leader gets murdered. He doesn't run, he steps up. By age 15, he has grown the Supreme Gangsters to over 1,000 members. 15 years old. Then came the money. And this, personally, I think this is the most underrated part of the entire story. This is where the government handed the keys to the kingdom to a gang, smiled, and called it a poverty program. 1967. Fort creates a non-profit called the Grassroots Independent Voters of Illinois. He applies for a federal anti-poverty grant through the Office of Economic Opportunity. $927,000. Approved. Gang members are put on a payroll as job training instructors. President Richard Nixon publicly praises the program. Fort is invited to Nixon's inauguration ball in January 1969. He doesn't go. Jeff Fort gets invited to the White House and says, no, let that land for a second. But behind the scenes, the program is hemorrhaging money. Eugene Hairston, Fort's co-leader and assistant project director of the program, gets convicted of paying teenage gang members $1 each and some cold cuts to commit murder while running a federally funded jobs program. Senator John McClellan hauls Fort before his subcommittee. The very first question prepared for him, after all the congressional resources, all the investigators, all the federal scrutiny, the first question is, where do you live, Jeff? Fort refuses to answer. He refuses to answer every single question. Convicted of contempt of Congress, McClellan stands up and declares, it doesn't make sense, this squandering of taxpayers' money. And the White House, the same White House that praised the program, says nothing. Then comes January 1969. Fort and Hoover sit down to talk alliance. And for one brief moment, it looks like the two most powerful young gang leaders in Chicago history might unite. They don't. Fort refuses equal partnership. He wants the throne, not a table. A shooting breaks out near Hoover's home.